Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the fourth of our Hybrid Futures talks, parts of the digital innovation season here at Central St. Martin's University of the Arts, London. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you this evening and to kick off our talks for 2021. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world. My name is Betty Marenko. I am a reader in design and techno-digital futures at Central St. Martin's, where I also run the contextual studies program for the BA in product and industrial design. Before we start with this evening's session, a couple of housekeeping notes. As usual, the event is recorded and will be accessible on YouTube. The audience mic and videos are turned off. You're welcome to post comments or share questions in the chat for Kay, our facilitators, to pick up later at the end of the talk. Before introducing tonight's speaker, let me share with you a couple of words about the rationale behind this series of Hybrid Futures talks. The idea that we have here is to illuminate the impact of digital technologies on the human and the non-human, to understand and to unpack how our ways of living, of existing, of thinking and feeling have been profoundly transformed by machines, the devices, the platforms that we use every day, those also that are invisible but very tangible infrastructures. The Hybrid Futures talks want to ask questions around these issues and create a forum where we can discuss and we can experiment with ways of building responses that are both creative and critical to the challenges that technologies are presenting today. And together with a series of skill-based workshops for Central St. Martin students, which are offered throughout the digital innovation season, our aim is to bring together creative practice and critical thinking, not just to find solutions to those pressing problems raised by technologies, but also to ask questions, important questions, perhaps difficult questions, about the relationship we have with the technologies that we humans have created, and questioning about the futures we envision and how we can reimagine and recraft human-machine encounters. Now, some of the most interesting ideas on how to rethink this constantly evolving relationship with machines come from French philosopher, technologist, and mechanologist, Gilbert Simondon. And one of his key arguments that I want to share with you is that there is a substantial misunderstanding in how humans perceive technology. To say that there is an opposition between culture and techniques, between humans and machines, is not correct, he says. It is actually a sign of ignorance or even resentment. It is a misunderstanding. And this misunderstanding prevents us from realizing not only that technical objects evolve, but that this process is always a co-evolution of humans and technology and technologies that cohabit. So whether we consider an engine, an artificial intelligence, a smartphone, or an algorithm, technical objects are always the temporary expression of a spontaneous evolution, which depends neither on natural processes nor on human design exclusively. So far from evolving in isolation, technical objects are always the result, for Simondon, of a process where internal parts and functions keep on converging and adapting so that the object acquires some sort of internal coherence that propels it beyond the intention of its inventor, of its designer. So even though everything is designed and made by human, those technical objects sort of acquire a life of their own. And this life is both material, but also imaginative. Technical objects are also instruments of the imagination. And this process of evolution that he calls technogenesis the genesis of technical objects, is fully integrated into culture. There is no separations. This is like to say that humans are always already among machines, and technical objects, likewise, are always already among humans and co-evolving with humans, with us. If we push this idea even further, we might even be able to say that it makes little sense to talk about artificial intelligence. Instead, perhaps there is only one intelligence, constantly morphing, constantly evolving. And maybe this is what Simondon meant when he wrote "The robot does not exist." It's a rather enigmatic expression. Maybe this is what he meant. But also he suggested that all the the mythologies, the stories, the narratives that we tell each other about technology must be demystified. And the same misunderstanding that keeps a sort of technology separated from culture also prompts humans to attribute will and agency to machines and to feel threatened by them. And it's also impact, he says, on the way in which we understand, we interpret automatism. Those who worship the machine believe that the more automatism there is, the better the machine will be. Think about the perfect ultimate machine, the machine of machines. And this is where Simondon gives us another interesting insight. He thought that automatism actually is the low degree of technical perfection. In other words, a truly progressive, fully evolved machine is based not on an increase of automatism, but on the presence of margins of indeterminacy. And it is precisely this indeterminacy that allows the machine to be sensitive, to be tuned into outside information, and enable the degree of openness which is necessary for the machine to keep on evolving. So the machine has to be open, and it is only by being open to this indeterminacy that can evolve. And this evolution is always a co-evolution. And in a short text he wrote in 1961, so before digital technologies, he actually describes the characteristic of the open object, and he imagines this open object to be to have a reticular structure with some parts that are indestructible and as permanent as possible, and other parts that have a high capacity to adjust to usage, wear and tear, and breakage, and most important, replacement. And this suggests a very dynamic process through which a machine actually evolves: perfectibility and indeterminacy, functionality and openness to change at the same time. If this is the space where we might find also absurd machines, useless machines, machines that don't work, like Bruno Monari's machine, or machines that work to self-destruct, like Jean Tinguely machines, or even unpredictable, non-trivial machines, to use a cybernetic terminology. This is also the space where the capacity to intervene with creativity, ingenuity is utterly manifest and palpable, and also with the sheer curiosity. And this is what we'll be hearing tonight with our great, fantastic guest speaker that is joining us tonight, Nicolas Nova. The title of Nicolas' talk appropriately is Dr. Smartphone, Repair and Maintenance as a Form of Innovation. Nicolas is a researcher, speaker, and educator. He is an anthropologist of technology, active in the field of interaction design, future research, and digital cultures. His work is focused on observing and documenting digital and new media practices. Nicolas is active, has been active in the establishment of design fiction, an approach to anticipate and speculate. He is both co-founder of the Near Future Laboratory, a research agency based in Europe and California, and associate professor at the Geneva School of Arts and Design. Nicolas is also associate researcher at the Media Lab Sciences Po in Paris. He holds a PhD in social science from the University of Geneva and another PhD in human-computer interaction from the Swiss Institute of Technology. He was previously visiting professor at the French National Institute for Advanced Studies in Industrial Design at Politecnico di Milano and Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. Please welcome Nicolas Nova. And again, the title of Nicolas' talk is Doctor, Smartphone, Repair and Maintenance as a Form of Innovation. Thank you very much for joining us. And when you're ready, you can share your screen.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning if it's the morning, good evening if it's the evening. Thank you, Betty, for the very thorough and deep introduction with Gilbert Simondon, and I hope I can probably use some of this terminology in my presentation. So let me just share the screen right now. Okay, normally I think it's working. All right. Okay, so my intention tonight is to probably get back to a project I recently completed about smartphone repair practices. And one of the reasons, I mean, probably to make a bridge between what Betty just presented and my presentation, I think one of the important keyword in what Betty just described is the notion of technogenesis, how technical object can be created. And we as design practitioners, as engineers, as people observing human-machine interaction, we tend to focus on what happens when we create those technologies, what happens when we use those technologies, and we often forget that these technologies can break, can have problems, can have incidents, and that some people may have to take care of that. It could be the users, it could be repairers, it could be maintainers, and that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about tonight. A project that I've done with my colleague Anaïs Bloch in the last 4 years. And I mean, it's basically an ethnography of smartphone repair shops. And although I work at the intersection of ethnography and anthropology and design, the focus of most of the presentation will be focused on this ethnography part. And I try in the conclusion to show you what are the consequences for design, what it means to use this kind of research in the context of a design school or in the context of a design fiction agency like the Near Future Laboratory. So probably to give you a little bit more context about how I came to be interested in this kind of topic, how I became interested in like repair practices regarding digital technologies. Probably one angle that caught my attention is what you have represented on this image. I'm an avid observer of the world as an ethnographer, and I'm always both fascinated and worried about the way technologies are often thought of as something that is virtual or immaterial. And when you encounter like a screen or a computer on a beach like this, I think it's in Martinique, in the French Caribbean island, I always wonder about like it's a kind of like reminder that technologies exist in a context of a world, a planet that is not necessarily immaterial, and that there are a lot of ecological problems regarding digital technologies. And I mean, as a person who works, as a researcher who works on like digital cultures and digital technologies, and who's been working on that for more than 15 years, I mean, there's a kind of tension that I started becoming interested in the last 5 years or so, that I illustrate here with two sorts of books or kind of kind of changes that are happening in society. On the one hand, you have all those companies, think tanks, institutions like the World Economic Forum, for instance, that push us, into like the fourth industrial revolution, into the digital transformation of society, with this idea that the digital and like information and communication technologies will change society in a good way. And on the other hand, you have all the discourses and the references and the books and research about the fact that we need to change the way we live on this planet because it's not sustainable, because it's problematic, and it may lead to a certain degree of environmental and social collapse. And what I find interesting and problematic in showing you this two paths is that there seems to be, like in the last 5 years or so, two kind of trends. On the one hand, this trend about digital technologies that existed, it's been a long time it existed, but it's been reinforced in the last 5 years or so. And on the other hand, the fact that we have to make some kind of change to get some kind of ecological transition. And what I found stunning is that they exist independently, and sometimes when we try to compare them or to see if they can be combined, we realize that it's not possible, that if we push for a certain degree of digital revolution, there might be dramatic consequences for the environment and vice versa. So that's, I think, was the sort of underpinning that made me wonder about what does it mean to try to see what happens at the intersection of those two trends. And of course, if you look at the design and engineering practices around that, you will see that there are many. Most of the energy is about, or most of the initiatives are about trying to redesign technologies, digital technologies, in a way that are not more sustainable, less problematic for the environment, for people. And if you've heard about Fairphone, the Dutch phone company, it's exactly about trying to find this kind of balance between designing digital technologies and being respectful of the environment and people. So that's where a lot of attention is, and that's probably interesting and relevant. But as a social scientist, as an anthropologist interested in people's practices, I'm interested in different approaches. I'm interested in people. What do people do when they feel that they use their digital technologies, but do not want to have unsustainable practices? And I've done research about smartphone technologies and how people use smartphone. I did this big project about smartphone usage in Geneva, Switzerland, compared to Los Angeles. And in the process of this research project, I started noticing a lot of repair and maintenance practices that people were trying to adopt, to put into place, to, well, make their devices like smartphone last longer. And that's why I started being interested in repair practices from the user's perspective, to understand how people try to learn how to change their screens, repair button, cracked screens, problems with software, etc. And that progressively, it led me to this kind of place that is represented on the next slide. All those shops or stores that appeared on the streets in our cities in the last 15 years or so, where this one is in Marseille in France, but there are many of them everywhere. Basically, it's popping up everywhere, and I started becoming like super intrigued by what happened in those places. Like they can repair, they can maintain, they can try to refurbish laptop computers to study innovation and see how this kind of ecological dimension existed in contrast with this notion that digital technologies are evolving. And I of course, as a researcher, what you do in this kind of context is you apply for a research grant, you get the money, you hire people, and you do a project. So what I did in the last 4 years, was to work with a colleague, Anaïs Bloch, who's both a designer and an anthropologist. And we did like a 2 years field research project in which we were interested in this, how to rethink the notion of repair in the context of digital cultures. So here on this slide, I mean, it's 3 references among many of them. It's just to highlight the fact that in the last probably 10 years or so, there's been some kind of turn in science and technology studies where researchers like historians, sociologists, anthropologists, design researchers, and others in gender studies as well became interested in rethinking how we see repair. And that is something that is often neglected theoretically, but also when you talk about technologies. And that it could be an interesting starting point to reflect and to analyze the implications of this sort of coevolution between human beings and technology that Betty presented in her introduction. So to put things in a more pragmatic context, what we did, and it's probably a bit strange, but what we did was to take Switzerland, where I work in Switzerland in Geneva, but we took Switzerland as a case study about repair practices. We were interested in like shops, the ones which are not affiliated with big companies. We're interested in repair cafes and hackerspaces and fab labs where you have those kind of repair and maintenance activities of digital technologies. And one of the reasons why we took Switzerland is that it's a bit counterintuitive when you talk about repair. You see a lot of people when you mention repair, especially about digital technologies and Switzerland, we might say, yeah, it's a super rich country. Repair is not really an issue. People always change their devices. And we were like, yeah, perhaps, but there's also more and more shops, more and more repair cafes, and more stores that try to help people repair their devices. So why not taking a super advanced and wealthy country and try to understand in this context, what are the repair practices? What exists in terms of repair practices, and contrast that with the work that exists in other countries, because there's a lot of research in other countries which are not as wealthy as Switzerland. So what we did was we did what is called multi-sited ethnography. We focused on different places in Geneva, Lausanne, and Zurich. And we selected a certain number of stores, repair cafes, and hacker spaces where we would spend some time, a few months in some of the shops. Some others we did like interviews with observation. For some others we did online observations on forums and communication platforms where repairers were talking about how to repair those devices. And over time, we built an understanding of those different places. It's given that we operate in a design context, we tend to favor visual ethnography. So we did a lot of videos, a lot of photography about the repair practices, mostly focusing on trying to understand the gestures, the relationship the repairers were having with those devices that you're not supposed to open. To get back to the notion of openness and technology that Betty gave in the introduction, one of the questions we were interested in is how people were not necessarily formally trained in repairing iPhones or Android phones would do it, how they build and how they document their knowledge and share it with other people, and how they innovate in a way. I will try to show you that in the second part of the presentation. So we were interested in the sort of tools they use, the material they produce, the richness and the diversity of documents they create. Some are really some are online and in their computers. Some others are like these kind of sheets of papers about iPhone 7 that some repairers were collecting. And another angle that we adopted was to we quickly, in the project, we quickly noticed that it would be difficult to take pictures of people's face, and because I would say that most of the repairers in Switzerland are not Swiss, and some of them are not necessarily there with the proper official documents, so they were not really comfortable with having their face directly shot. So we used a lot of drawings and sketches like that Anaïs, my colleague, did, and we noticed that this use of like this kind of visual ethnography using drawings could be super useful to build a relationship with the repairers. Most of them were not really understanding what we were doing at first, so we had to build some kind of what we call rapport in anthropology, and some relationship with them so that they can trust us and not think that we wanted to steal their ways of repairing stuff and create a new store, which was absolutely not our goal. And I mean, those are just examples of the material we produced. A lot of ethnographic vignettes in which we documented some incidents, some issues, some lessons from the repair practices. And I mean, I'm going to skip that. And we turned that into a book. I mean, the rest of my presentation will try to use that kind of material from the book to explain some of the lessons we took from this research study. The book, I can probably give the link later so that it's shared online, but it's an open access book. Of course, there's a physical copy, but there's a free open access version because it's funded by a public institution here in Switzerland. And the whole, I mean, I show you the picture of the book because not just to show this weird font from the smartphone companies, but also because it basically summarizes what we were interested in, an ethnography of mobile phone repair shops. And most of them, I mean, the reason why we called the project Doctor Smartphone is that there's a tendency in those places to use the medical metaphor to explain what they do, acting as sort of doctors of technologies. And in the process of doing that, as helping people, as if the doctor smartphones had to use the smartphones to help the people and try to help those people build a different relationship with their technology. And the book is basically it's a series of portraits of different repairers in Geneva, Lausanne, and Zurich. As you can see, we use a lot of a mix of text, images, drawings to illustrate our findings in a way that could be accessible for the participant in our study. That's important. And also peers who could be ethnographers, researchers, could be designers, design students, or design practitioners. And we wanted to have a book that could be read with different angles. Like if you want to just look at the stories, you can use you can look at the drawings. If you want to go deeper into the analysis and the implications of what we saw, you can read the part at the end, which is more analytical. And what we tried to cover in this book, and what I summarize here with this term, a hidden laboratory of care, is basically what I try to explain in a few minutes. It's the fact that those places that are often neglected, we see them in cities. We see them as places which are like, some people go there because they crack their phone screen, or they have a problem with a button, or they do not really know how to use certain software properly. They're partly about repairing the device and making it last longer. That's the ecological probably dimension, but also about trying to engage people into caring more about their devices and build a different relationship with them. So what does it mean practically? It means practically that what we noticed in this research is that there's really a wide diversity of places between the Fab Lab. The Fab Lab on the left is one near the train station here in Geneva, and shops which exist with a more commercial perspective. So it seems like there's two different ends of the spectrum, like the more associative or the places that are more there to support the local community, like Fab Lab and hackerspaces, and on the other end, commercial practices. But this is probably a bit of a caricature because oftentimes they collaborate with one another, and sometimes commercial shops can also be engaged in similar activities as Fab Labs, and sometimes people crack their phone screen and go to the Fab Lab to find a new one. So the kind of, I mean, it shows some kind of nuance between those hidden laboratories of care that I've presented before. As you can see here, it's written in French, but it means operating room, and there's a whole, I mean, and it's a bit tongue-in-cheek probably, but it's interesting to notice how the medical metaphor became important in those places, as if the object was less important than the idea of caring, trying to intervene, to operate, to repair in a way that would make people understand that the repairers would care about the client and the object themselves. Of course, in terms of the services that are provided there, some of them are about the hardware, some other are about the software, like for instance, helping you to reinstall certain operating system, how to build, how to change the battery, or how to reconfigure your phone so that the battery is not wasted after a few hours. But that's probably less interesting. I'm going to switch that. Probably less interesting than what we noticed in terms of techniques, how the repairers were repairing objects that they were not 100% sure to repair, how they build certain gestures, certain processes, certain procedures to repair those devices. And here, it's because we spent a long time in those places that we started noticing different techniques and procedures that were interesting. And it's interesting because we had a contrast between, on the one hand, the repairs were diplomas. The one on the left had a diploma, was an old guy, had this diploma about how to repair like radio communication devices. And this is like a very uncommon profile for the repairers. Most of the repairers we noticed were like the one on the right who created those. I mean, it's people who started repairing stuff and objects as teenagers and with help of their parents or their friends, and grew their expertise by trying to repair by themselves an Android phone like this one. So this example on the right is from a guy from Syria living in Geneva. I don't think he had the right official documents to be there, but he grew this kind of expertise by tearing down Android phones and trying to repair them by himself. And as you can see, it leads to this kind of weird experimentation, weird materiality of a sort of exploded kind of Android phone. And in doing this, there's this kind of like reverse engineering and a sort of experience and expertise in tearing down objects and trying to rebuild them that most of the repairers we observed were more following this kind of approach to learn how to build this expertise about repairing stuff, and learning as is represented on the drawing on the slide here. There's this kind of typical situation where as soon as a new model comes out, as this person says, we have to update our knowledge. We bought an iPhone 7, for instance, our technicians broke it, and it costs us a lot of money, like 1,000 Swiss franc, but it's an opportunity to learn. So there's this very interesting notion of critical making that Matt Ratto uses in his work. And what we noticed was a kind of, I would call that like it's a critical unmaking or critical tearing down of digital object that those persons, those repairers adopted as a practice to build their own expertise. It's as if there were some kind of small R&D laboratory who had to rebuild or try to reappropriate the existing technologies, and that cost them money, and that makes them like having headaches about how to make things work perfectly. But it's as if they had this kind of R&D, research and development, to anticipate the needs of their clients. The image on the right is also to show you that the expertise is not just about tearing down phone, it's also about collecting past phones and PCs and phone parts that they could reuse eventually in their project and to serve their clients. And there's a whole expertise that existed in between, like tearing down phones, collecting phone parts, building the right relationship with phone part vendors, and also designing proper tools to repair artifacts. So here is, for instance, how one of the repairer that we spent time with, he showed us this kind of micro soldering station that he designed. It's a microscope that he adjusted and transformed so that he could intervene and do micro soldering, meaning like tearing down the phone and doing soldering on tiny pieces on the phone inside. And this is, I think it's important. Sorry for it's illustration only in French here, but what I wanted to show you here with this slide is the fact that the expertise that those repairers built were not just based on technology, was also based on the relationship they built with local networks and international networks. Local networks, for instance, by having groups on WhatsApp of other repairers with whom they could share their problems, they could share their concerns, they could share the need to have certain phone parts. Local network also with different shops. We noticed that over time in the 4 years of the project, some shops specialized in certain activities. Some were more specialized into like reconditioning the displays. Some others are more focusing on software issues and operating system and data recovery. Some others were focusing on very basic kind of part replacement. And all those people, they work together somehow in a sort of cooperation and competition in a way that they could benefit from each other. And the last kind of international network that is important, especially for the most prominent and the most active shops, were the network that the shops here in Geneva, in Switzerland, they built with people in Hong Kong, in Shenzhen, to have access to certain phone parts. The most, I would say the best one, but they would tell me it's not just the best, it's the one they could trust, the one they could trust for their clients. And we had like, most of the shops that were super active in Geneva and Zurich had good relationship with certain vendors there so that they could import parts that could be that could be robust and that could be not problematic, so that the way they would serve their clients would be good. So it's interesting to understand that those places, they might look like a very crappy like shop on the street that you overlook when you pass by. But from our understanding, it's not just one shop, it's a network of local stores, for instance, independent repairers, and sometimes fab labs and hackerspaces, and a network that is connected to different vendors on the, from Geneva or Zurich to Shenzhen. And the most active ones realized that they could also specialize in importing certain phone parts. So I find that, one of the reasons I mentioned this here is that we often perceive like innovation and the industrial market of technology that is based on like prominent brands like Samsung, Apple, Huawei, etc. But we often overlook this kind of neglected sort of like ecosystem of different actors of digital technologies that I just mentioned, who can like serve their clients with like new batteries, new phone parts, sometimes entirely refurbished phone that they they repaired themselves or used from certain or imported from certain vendors in Shenzhen. But it's as if there was some kind of parallel world that we uncovered in this project that make us realize that when the shops try to help people to make people's phone last longer, it could lead to like connection with some kind of hidden underworld about digital technology that is not so small. I mean, there's big business happening here. Few points more before going to my conclusion. One angle we were super excited about was to notice how the shops themselves were, the repairers were building a documentation about how to repair those devices. So here on the left, you have one of the repairer, one of the female repairers. It's mostly male, but we had some female repairers, and she is documenting using her smartphone all the gestures that the repairers in her shops were doing, and trying and tag those videos and put that aside, collect that as a material so that they could go back to it if they want to renew and change their expertise. On the right, you have like the it's the sort of notebook, like paper notebook that one of the repairers showed us, with like pictures with like super zoomed pictures of the motherboard that with like some annotations in French, Arabic, and Spanish or English. This is another example of the way people who try to reverse engineer to do this critical unmaking that I mentioned before are trying to make sense of those very complex phone parts, and using paper, using like plastic bindings to document their notes, and use that later for themselves, or sometimes they share it with other people to either to help other people or to ask some help from other stores or other companies to make sense of the complexity of those devices. And that leads me to the notion of innovation that I've included in the title of the presentation. One reason we wanted to to use this term innovation in the context of this project is that for a lot of people, innovation is just about new technologies. It's just about serving like people with new technologies. But what we noticed in those shops, in the repairers' practice, is that there's a sort of social innovation that happened, in the sense that the repairers, what they try to do, sometimes it fails, but what they try to do, they do their best in like first repairing the phones, not necessarily turning them into new phones, but trying to make the smartphones or the tablets last longer. But more than that, what we try to do, and that's something we noticed right away, as soon as we started spending time in the shop, we noticed that they tried to help people building a different relationship with the technology, either by providing them with better software or hardware, like applications to increase the performance of the phone, but more importantly, to help people to know when to adjust the setting of the phone so that the battery lasts longer, how to build a different relationship with the applications, and how the data are collected by the software companies. Some of those shops try to help people make people more conscious ecologically about what it means to charge the phone too often, find some alternatives in terms of technology. So there was a whole lot of recommendation, advices, tips that were shared, sometimes orally, like in discussion with the clients, like what you have here, where the repairer is showing the motherboard of the phone to the client to explain to the client how the phone works. So sometimes it's like a discussion, sometimes it's based on documents that they share with people, It could be leaflet, could be flyers, could be online documents, could be pointing clients to iFixit web pages. But what we were really stunned about in this project was to notice how those places were trying to not just to solve people's problem, but to engage them in a different relationship with technology. And that's, I mean, it was a surprise, but eventually we realized that this was, it's not so surprising if you think about it, because if you look at the history of repair places in other contexts, in the history of technology, similar phenomena happen. Another thing we noticed here, it's written in French, but it says machines or apparatus for phone parts. We noticed also how these places were building an expertise, not just in repairing, but also in like collecting recycled parts that they could reuse for themselves or for their like sometimes competitors or friends that they could share with them. So that's now an avenue, the research avenue that I'm interested in, like about recycling and how some like phone or computer parts can be reused. But that's something that is, I mean, it's becoming much more prominent, mostly because the different international importation and exportation circuits have changed because of regulations, especially in Asia. So in Europe, a lot of places like this are starting to accumulate those parts and realize that they could build a business and an expertise about them. So that leads me to the conclusion to the presentation. So as you see, I mean, it's not like a design project. It's mostly more like an anthropology project focused on understanding repair culture in the context of repair shops, hackerspaces, and repair cafes. So we see this, I mean, with my colleague Anais, we see this as a sort of starting point. In most of the project that I'm doing, I'm interested in the ethnography part, documenting practices in the present as a sort of stepping stone or as a first phase prior to, well, building design fiction scenarios or trying to speculate about the future of certain practices. So in the context of this project, I'm basically intrigued by the fact that repair practices, repair and maintenance practices that I've described here very quickly, as opposed to the nuances in the book, what I've described here can be seen as a sort of, I mean, set of weak signals, some information, some indications about potential new scenarios about tomorrow that may become more prominent because of public regulations about repair practices, because of the interest of people, the clients, in having objects that can last longer. And that's, I mean, to go back to the study itself, what we realized was that the repairers, the one especially in the stores, those level stores that are not necessarily affiliated with big companies, they could be seen as an alternative figure to the makers, the maker movement. I'm sure you have heard of it. The maker movement that became very prominent with hackerspaces and Fab Labs and hacker communities in the last probably 15 years or so and before. That exists. That's all good and nice. But what we would try to uncover in this project is the fact that repairers can be seen also as a sort of different kind of persona, a different kind of figure to the maker movement, close in terms of the practices and the way to build an expertise, but operating in between the capitalist system, because they have a shop and they have to serve their client, but also taking the time to help people, taking the time to tear down technology so that they can learn how to repair them and share this information with other people. And they exist somehow as a sort of, I call that a marginal laboratory of care, in the sense that they're marginal, they're often neglected by a lot of people, especially big companies and also sometimes public institutions that are not really aware that they exist for helping people, for recycling objects. But they really help people to care about their technologies. And they're probably marginal nowadays, but they might take a more an importance that can grow later. And they exist as sort of laboratories in the sense that the way they operate, the way they unmake the technology to help their clients and repair the technologies is close to the notion of laboratory that was described in the context of anthropology studies or STS studies about laboratories. And to conclude with another term that I like, they can be seen as patches. If you read the book of the very prominent American anthropologist Anna Tsing, she uses the notion of patch or patches to describe those like practices, collective or places that are in this intersection of the capitalist world and non-capitalist practices that are marginal, but also somehow interconnected with an international network. In her book about the Matsutake mushroom, she described the people who pick Matsutake in the Oregon forest as being a patch somehow. And what I think, the reason why I use this notion in the context of the repairers is mostly because I can see those people acting as a patch as well, but in the context of digital bricolage, in the context of trying to build a different kind of relationship with technology in this co-evolution between machine and human that Betty presented at the beginning. All right, that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. That was a fantastic presentation, and I'm sure there are already questions coming through because a lot of what you said really resonates with our students, with designers, with practitioners. As questions come in, I want to kick off with an observation, or perhaps that can be turned into a question. I find very fascinating the fact that in the context that you have described, there is very pronounced this notion of helping user, helping people, not simply to reestablish a different kind of relationship with their technology, their device, but I suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, also to gain some kind of agency, some kind of control, or perhaps even, let's use the word, I don't know, empowerment. Because often in our relationship with the way in which the corporate industry presents, let's say, smart devices, users tend to be quite disempowered. You have a certain blueprint of usage or non-usage that you're supposed to follow, and often you feel completely cut off from any form of engagement, unless you are braver, you're bold, and you decided to do those action of critical unmaking and tearing down, which I think is a fantastic expression. So how often or how often did you find it in your ethnography this notion of empowerment actually being expressed by people you spoke to?
Yeah, it was quite common indeed. I mean, it was mostly described by the repairers as they were not using the term empowerment because it's not part of the vocabulary, but there was certainly this notion of a sort of arm race or sort of they tried to show their clients that the companies were trying to push for a certain model of interaction with technology, with a certain usage of technology, and that if the users understood a bit more how the technology works, they could have a bit more elbow room to use the smartphone or the tablets. And that, I mean, it's of course, when we think about those repairs, we think about like cracked screens and problems with buttons. But it's much more than that. It's the relationship with the battery. It's you have people asking the repairer, how do I talk to Siri because Siri doesn't understand my voice or my accent, or I'm not sure about Spotify recommendation system. I'm not sure about Facebook and the data and I don't know the WhatsApp and the Facebook data clash. So it's interesting, and of course the repairers, they do not always have the answer, but they have to show a good, like they have to show the client that they know. So they try to help them, and they try to use also this kind of argument, this kind of asymmetry between the companies and the users to engage people in understanding more this. And that's a topic that I think that's another project that I want to work on. We started working on that with my students here in Geneva, but I call that computational autonomy, how the understanding of technology, not necessarily like knowing how to program the computer, but how to learn some basic of the computational logic can be relevant for users. And that, I mean, it's something that was not really present at first in this research, because most of the repairs were focused on hardware problems. But over time, I mean, we saw the shift in the last 5 years where more and more clients were coming to the stores with questions about software issues and configuration and problems related to not machine learning, but still some certain degrees of automation. So what you presented at first about Simondon and automation and openness and the lack of understanding of technology, I mean, it's precisely what those people do, but they're not aware of this term. They're not aware of the term empowerment. They just understand that there's this kind of weird dynamic between the companies, the phone manufacturers and the software companies and the users, and they see as a mission to help people.
Did you find in following up on this mission, did you find also some overlapping between the world of design activism and hacking in the repair shops and something else that is just occurring to me is that what kind of relationship a lot of these repairers and labs that you call marginal laboratories of care have with the corporate industry, because of course they're aware of each other, but they work as you said, as some kind of parallel or underworld. So what kind of relationship is there, and can it sort of bleed into activism?
I mean, most of the one we saw had absolutely no relationship with like the big companies. Some have relationship with the telcos, like the telecommunication companies, like I mean, it's not in Switzerland. It's companies like Swisscom, Salt, or Sunrise, but it would be Vodafone in the UK or other companies. Some used to work in those places as selling just phones, but they were not like strong relationship with the hardware companies or the software companies. However, and it's another, I mean, in this kind of hidden underworld, there's a whole set of companies that exist at the intersection of those different worlds. Some of the shops we saw, they try to build relationship with like some I don't know how those companies are called, but it's companies specialized in tearing down phones and writing reports about the parts and the way the phones or computers work, and they sell for a very expensive price what they call tear down reports. It's very thick reports. It exists as PDF, where you have all the components of the new iPhone, and you have some analytical text about it, and that's, I mean, it's and of course the phone companies, they work with those people as well. So what I'm trying to say here is that there's a sort of network of different actors which are completely I mean, hidden in the general discourse about technology that exists. And to go back to your question about activism and hacker, it's funny because it's close to activism and hacking, but the shops, especially the shop, not the hackerspaces, but the shop, they do not necessarily use that vocabulary, and they do not read like all the, I mean, there's a whole discourse about hacking community and maker community, but it's the reason why I use this term, an alternative figure of maker culture. It's as if there were a different hacker culture that existed in the context of those guys. That is, I mean, as I said, they're not in the context of Switzerland, they're not necessarily Swiss. Most of them in Geneva coming from France with North African families. And it's, they have a different electronic and computing culture, and that's yeah, probably not surprising because there's not just one single kind of hacker community on this planet.
Thank you. And Kate, do we have any questions coming in through our audience?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple of questions. One that you kind of touched on already, so I'll just briefly mention from Matt Malthus. We have a two-parter. Matt was saying, love the insight of the repair shop as a site of social innovation and the transmission of know-how. Did you observe sentiments and attitudes that had a relationship to activism? So just what you were talking about there, maybe it wasn't talked about, but did you see the sentiment and attitudes there? And then he also
probably
mentioned,
sorry to interrupt, but I can add something about that as well. There's something that we noticed also almost right away in our observation was how the especially the shops, but sometimes the repair cafe as well, there were people coming there with requests about things that are for them are related with digital technology, like filling the taxes online on a platform they do not understand at all, using an online platform to take an appointment to the doctor, the medical doctor, and or help needing when people need some help to write a document in French and they do not know the language, they would show up there. And it's, I mean, the reason why I mentioned this is because in the 80s, you had photocopy shops who had similar requests from people, and some people in those shops provided some public writers services to people who do not know how to write, do not know how to deal with certain administrative transaction. And we saw exactly that as well in the shops, in the way that, especially in certain neighborhoods where you have one shop and the shop cater to the local community, and you would see people going there and absolutely not for changing a cracked screen or but for the client, this is digital technology. This is a digital service. This is something that they do not understand with regards to this notion of computational autonomy that I discussed before. And this, I mean, it's not activism, of course, but there's some kind of social innovation that happens, and that those shops, because they know that they have to, I mean, they know that they know that it's not business, but it's good to to care for local communities. So they do it anyway, and they also change their services accordingly. Some started offering service like we can help you filling certain forms, or and that I find, I mean, from a more external perspective, in terms of how public institutions, I don't know in the countries on other countries on this planet, but in Switzerland, for instance, there's a lot of concerns about like certain people who might not be able to use technologies for certain administrative purposes, and they are trying to think about how to help people. But what I find fascinating is that those places exist already in the shops. They provide this as a sort of sometimes free service, or sometimes they turn that into a not too costly kind of service. But it's also part of this kind of ecosystem of caring for people, and not just the planet. It's also about social justice, and I find that was a surprise, but it's I think it's an important lesson here.
Interesting. That's fascinating, actually. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to the other half of Matt's comment. Matt also said, so also the maker movement can possibly be challenged for its lack of diversity in how you describe the repairers. This is not the case. And Matt also said, but did you mention the possibility of makers being undocumented? Is there risk of exploitation amongst this group? What were your observations here?
Yeah, that's an important point as well. I mean, there's no general rule here, but some of them, I mean, there are a lot of tensions because of that, because some have like official documents, some do not have official documents. But I don't want to paint like a dark picture. There's also, I mean, especially with in the last 5 years and the expertise that certain repairers built, we noticed that some of them, I mean, they built some kind of reputation because they were like, there's one portrait, we called him because everyone called him the king of micro soldering. And this guy is so good at this that he just left one of the store and work as an independent worker for different shops because he knows he's good and the others knows it is a good repairer. So some of them managed to build an expertise as quite important, so that they could also benefit from this kind of place in the local ecosystem, so that they could get the official papers and also choose which shop they wanted to work for. And I find that also interesting because it's not just about diversity; it's also about a kind of empowerment that we mentioned before. The ones who really know how to do things work, they can also benefit from that in a more a more classic sense in the capitalist market. But they do not just do that for the sake of money. They also do that because it might be a way to reach a different kind of community of clients.
Thank you. I have a question from Keith Gaskell. They say, how do you think the right to repair movement of 2021 will affect these businesses? I understand it will allow public access to information and parts, so I wonder what that could offer or even harm.
I mean, this of course depends on from one country to the next, of course, but even, I mean, there's big tension with the industrial, the manufacturers of smartphone, tablets, computers, and the repairers, and there's a lot of like different ways to prevent this from happening. So that's one part of the equation, is that it becomes more and more difficult for the repairers to intervene, to operate, and some had to close their shop because it was too difficult and they did not have the right skills. So from what I understood, with some of the repairers, they see the right to repair movement as something that could help them regain a little bit of agency to certainly change the way they operate, but certainly gain a bit more possibility to help their clients to access certain parts, to have some of their activities more legally accepted, because some sometimes operate at the margin of what is legal or not legal. So they do not necessarily see the right to repair movement as something that would harm them, because they know that, I mean, it's an expertise. It's not given for everyone to do that, and it will eventually help them to operate in a more legal kind of context.
Thank you. I have a few questions here from Naomi. I'm wondering, should I read this all together, Naomi? What's going to make more sense? So Naomi's asking, how much of the repairers' innovation and technological courage in the face of closed access to information, parts, etc., is related to their relative economic disenfranchisement and precarity? And are their customers also driven to them by the inability to pay for authorized repairs or replacement devices rather than more eco or activist thinking?
I mean, for the first question, it was, I mean, it was not like directly mentioned by the repairers, but I mean, the most important motivation for the what we saw were they were simply fascinated and interested in technologies and tearing down everything and trying to reappropriate those technologies. Could be a video game console, a musical instrument, a DVD player, or a smartphone, and some were coming from like not really wealthy family, but it was not necessarily the first motivation. Probably beyond the fascination and the interest in tearing down object, there was also this, I mean, this kind of asymmetry that we have mentioned already. They wanted to reappropriate those technologies that existed. They were not supposed to be repaired, or were not supposed to be, especially the iPhones, for instance. And they saw that as a challenge because of their interest. And they also saw that there's a community of people who suffers or who do not understand this situation, and they could help them because of their skill sets. Now, for the other part of the question, it's like, as usual with ethnography, it's partly the case that some people were coming to those shops because they did not have enough money or resources to go to the big manufacturers, but it's not the case all the time. And for instance, there's some kind of dodgy area of Geneva where you have this kind of shops, and you can see like bankers and people who are really wealthy going there because it goes faster than going to the Apple store, and also because they can see the guy repairing the stuff there. They're for people who are really cautious about their privacy and digital data. Sometimes they do not trust like Apple or Samsung, but they trust their local guy that they could go to, and of course there could be a discussion, a price, and the process is not as streamlined as what happened with big manufacturers. So I do think, especially, I mean, this was one of the reasons it was interesting to do that in cities as wealthy as Geneva or Zurich, to see that the money angle is not necessarily the question. It's more like building a relationship with someone who would look into your very like your intimate relationship with your device, and that I find quite interesting. And also it's an asymmetry because obviously those people repairing the devices were not really wealthy, and some were quite disenfranchised, but they built some kind of trust with those people that the big companies were not managing to build. And I find that it's an important lesson as well.
I'm aware of time, and maybe we can squeeze in a very quick one before wrapping up, if there is.
Yeah, perfect. Naomi did leave some other interesting comments, but they weren't specifically questions. So I'm going to go to Andreas next. Andreas has asked, what are the repairers' perception on the tech firm's evil design, products not designed to be repaired, as the repairers engage in practices that are economically dependent on that form of design?
Well, but most of them are unhappy about that, but they know that it's a kind of arm race, and they, I mean, especially the one we build like this kind of very strong expertise, they would joke about that. They would joke about, yeah, Apple is going to do this or Samsung is going to do that, but my cousin is going to help me to bypass this problem, or I know that if I go to this guy in Shenzhen, or if I spend a lot of time on this, I will manage to find a workaround or something. Some say that it's, I mean, they're unhappy about it because it takes a lot of time for them to unmake those objects and build this expertise. But I mean, the prominent one, they're kind of confident that their activity will still last. And every time there's something new that prevent them from repairing, they would say, "Oh, we'll find a way. It won't be 100% perfect, but we'll find a way." And yeah, so and of course that's also in the way they frame this, the way they reported on this. It's also a way to show them that they're good. But I mean, they still managed to work on that, and that's also kind of impressive.
I think that's a beautiful image that can stay with us as we conclude this sort of arm race and this constant incredible adaptability and agility in regaining agency and in constantly reconfiguring that relationship with devices. I think it was just wonderful. I want to thank you, Nicolas, for such an inspiring talk and conversation. Thank you, Jacob, technician. Thank you, Kay, for facilitating. And thank you, the audience out there, for your participation, listening, and your question. And we have the next talk is going to be next Wednesday. So keep on checking our Digital Innovation Season website. And I wish you a very good evening or good day, wherever you are. Thank you again. And thanks, Nicolas. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.